Hello, crafty friends. My name is Jessica, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I have a card for you featuring a product from the new Simon Says Stamp Splendor release. This is the Bunny Kisses set, and then I'm pairing it with this oldie but goodie fine petal background die. So what I'm doing right now is I'm creating a mask. I knew I just wanted to keep most of this dye white, but I wanted to add a hint of pink. So I'm bringing in Twirling Tutu. This is an original ink from Simon Says Stamp. And I'm just going to go ahead and kiss the tips of all of these tulips. Now I cut that little hitch in that paper so that I would be sure that we weren't getting ink where we didn't want it. And I'm just using that as a mask in order to focus on the tips of these little petals and so that I'm not inking up the background as well. When I use this die, I like to put foam squares behind every single petal, and you'll see that later on, but it just adds a beautiful dimension and a little playfulness to this background die. So I'm just using this piece of paper to tuck behind the petals to ensure that I'm only putting the ink where I want it. Now this is a fairly light pink. This is probably the lightest pink in the Simon Says Stamp original ink line. And so I was putting it on a little heavier than I had originally intended, but once you go heavy, you cannot take it back without starting over. So I went ahead and just went with the flow, and I'm adding it to every single petal here. I'm using a small Simon Says Stamp brush. This is the pink one. You can get a pack of 10 in every color family, and the handles match those color families for about $49. I think I just looked. But with this Splendor release, they did release through the Rainbow Splash line, which is a Simon Says Stamp line, 10 brushes for about a $15 savings if you want them all to be white handled, which is really great. You could use some washi tape to indicate the color family, or you could write on them with a marker. They're definitely a brush that's a little bit more budget friendly if you're okay without having all the rainbow things. That pricing was for the larger headed brushes. The smaller ones are still about a $15 savings if you're okay with the handles being white. So I'm just going in and using this small brush and just making sure that I hit every single petal, even the ones that are not fully complete. And you'll see that here in just a minute. I'm going to use my piece of paper to tuck in and just make sure that they have a little bit of color on it before I move on. I've done a couple other techniques with this fine petal dye, one of them being using Tonic Nouveau shimmer powders. So I encourage you to go find me on Instagram at Jessica Vasher and look back on all the different ways that I've used this beautiful dye. Now, hindsight is always 2020, and a part of me wishes that I would have used color cardstock, maybe a pink, and then added the darker pink ink on top to give it just a little bit more playfulness and more dimension. So I'm just finishing up all the very obvious petals, and then as I'm looking, I notice that there's these little tiny glimpses of petals on the side. So I'm just using that corner of that mask and just ensuring that I add a little bit of color to them so that they aren't so stark white. I'll also add some ink to the top of the panel so that those top panel flowers blend in with the rest of the background. This ends up being a fairly easy card once we have all of the petals blended. This is probably the most tedious part, but it's well worth it in the end to ensure that everything is uniform and looks cohesive. So yes, here I am just adding a little bit of color to the top to ensure that those aren't so stark white. Once we have the ink right where we want it, we're going to go ahead and move on to the most adorable little bunny stamp ever. Absolutely cute. Quick cleanup, I like to rub all of my ink brushes off on a microfiber cloth when I am done to ensure that that ink is off of the brush for the next use. Now it's time to get started on this adorable bunny. This is the Bunny Kisses stamp set from the Splendor release with Simon Says Stamp. And I'm using the largest bunny in a couple of the Positively Saturated ink colors to get it inked up. This is a layering stamp set, and I love how Simon Says Stamp has colored the acetate to let you know what layer is which and also lettered and numbered it so that you don't get confused. You start with the first one, you move to the second and through the numbers as you build your bunny. I can remember when layering stamp sets first came on the market, or at least when I first think that they did, and they were sometimes very challenging trying to get them lined up. I remember a specific class that I took where she recommended that you used a marker to make sure that you indicated the top part of the stamp in order to ensure that you line it up. And even then, sometimes it wouldn't line up. But Simon Says Stamp is making it really easy and ensuring that you have everything you need in order to complete this adorable bunny. I absolutely love that the cheeks and the nose are together. I love making pink little cheeks on critters, and this just was super easy to do so. I am using the Twirling Tutu color in order to bring this card together. That's the same color that we used on the petals and the background die, and it just allows for the card to come together cohesively. Now, I wanted to have the tail be somewhat textured because bunnies do have fluffy tails. And so I used my brush to kind of dot off the color to get us that brushy feel. It didn't quite get how I wanted it to, but I think it would be more obvious with a darker color. And the lighter color was just having a hard time showing the texture that would have been created if it had been a little bit darker. Now, I am fussy cutting this out, but this stamp set does have dies if you are not a fussy cutter. I don't mind fussy cutting, especially when you're using these really sharp scissors from Simon Says Stamp. It makes it a lot easier. So if you're having a hard time fussy cutting, be sure that your scissors are sharp and that they're thin so that it's easier to get around these tight spaces and corners. So next, after we finish cutting this bunny out, I'm going to take a gel white pen and add a little bit of texture to the tail. I felt like it was still lacking and I wanted to create just a little bit more playfulness, but it'll be hard to see at this lighting. But I just took a gel pen and did little curly cues and squiggles all over the tail to make it look like it was fluffy. And then the next thing is I felt like the rabbit needed an eye. So the one I stamped off testing color, I did a trial run to ensure it's what I wanted. And then I did something that I kind of regretted, but I'm okay with it, is I gave the nose two little nose nostrils and I kind of regretted it after that, but that's okay. He's still cute. And like I said last time, handmade cards are meant to be, not perfect and have that hand touch feel. So I went ahead with it. Someone, whoever I send this to, is going to love it and they're not going to think anything of it. It's just my personal opinion on it not looking right, but we're going to move on. So I took a sentiment from the same stamp set and went ahead and cut it out using this guillotine trimmer. But then I didn't want it square. The card currently has a lot of curves with the petals and the bunny, and so I did go ahead and decide to cut it out. I didn't like the square feeling on that card. So I'm using the scissors to give it more of a rounded feel, and this will also make the sentiment a little bit smaller. The footprint of it will be smaller, which will make it less noticeable and kind of help it blend into the card. Now that we have everything cut out, it's time to build the card up. I'm going to go ahead and score my card base. I use Neenah Solar White 110 pound for my card bases. And then I thought it would be really fun to add a color behind this petal die. It won't be super noticeable, but I'll know that it's there. And then we're going to do something to the petals on this card to try to highlight that green color in the background. So you'll see it when the card's tipped, but just to increase that, we're going to put some foam squares behind it. So I'm just going to add glue around the outside. And now, hindsight, looking back, it probably would have been a little easier if I had added all the foam squares before I glued it down. But things are always easier when you're reviewing your video footage and thinking of ways where it could have been a little bit faster. But instead, I'm going to go ahead and take these foam squares. These are from Simon Says Stamp, and these are the ones that have a thicker loft to them. So they're pretty thick, but I love the look that it gives. It pops those tulips up, or I'm going to call them tulips. And it really helps showcase that green behind there, that little sneak peek. And it also gives some really fun texture to the background die. If you wanted less height or loft to this die, you could use the thinner foam squares to ensure that you're not creating too much dimension and cause an issue with mailing. I have mailed one of these cards before, and while it's a little tight to get into the envelope, it did mail fine with normal postage. Now I'm just finishing up adding the additional squares to the outside petals, and then we're going to go ahead and get the bunny placed on. I'm going to use some liquid glue to ensure that he sticks where he needs to, since there is a lot of dimension going on. It would be hard to put him in. And then I'm fiddling, trying to decide, does he look cute behind the petal? Should I put him in front of the petal? And I thought he was just too cute. I didn't want to hide him behind. So I went ahead and we're going to put him on top. But because there's so much dimension there, I'm going to place a block on top to ensure that we get that pressure and he makes a good connection to the background. Now I'm really excited about these. These are the foam strips from Simon Says Stamp. These are new with the Splendor release. I absolutely loved the Doris foam strips, but they quit making them, or I'm not 100% sure, but you can't get them anywhere. So I'm super excited that Simon Says Stamp has these because these are so good for shaker cards, these tiny sentiments, anything that you want to add a little dimension, but you don't want to try to cut your regular foam tape down. These are perfect. So I'm so glad that Simon came out with these, and I'll be looking forward to purchasing more to ensure that I don't run out since I have a slight addiction to adhesive. Well, that's it for the card today. I appreciate you taking your time to watch this video. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss a notification. Thanks for joining me. Take care.